They say that in the dead of night, when the moon hides its face and the wind howls through the ruins of Ethelgard, you can still hear him. Not a ghost, but an echo, a memory of torment imprinted on the very stones. It is the sound of a king's final, agonized scream as he watched his world turn to fire and ash. This is not a story of heroes, nor a fable of redemption. It is a chronicle of rot, of a crown so heavy it crushed the head that wore it, and a kingdom drowned in the flames of one man's ambition. The story of Ethelgard is a cautionary whisper, a testament to the truth that a throne built on fear will inevitably become a pyre. Before the silence, there was a king who promised a golden age. Before the ash, there was a queen whose beauty could tame beasts. And before the sorrow, there was a princess who was the last glimmer of hope. Their tale is etched in the scorched earth, a grim reminder that power is a voracious beast, and when it starves, it will always turn to devour its master, leaving behind nothing but the cold, silent ruins of a kingdom that burned from the inside out. King Alaric was never meant to wear the crown. He was born of a lesser house, a man forged in the brutal border wars, with eyes that held the cold glint of polished steel. He did not inherit his throne. He carved it from the flesh and bone of his rivals. He rose to power on a tide of populist fervor, his voice a mesmerizing storm that promised strength to the weak and ruin to the corrupt old guard. He spoke of a new dawn for Ethelgard, an empire of unyielding strength, and the people, tired of famine and weakness, believed him. They cheered as he rode through the capital, his black banner eclipsing the old royal standard. But his ascent was a staircase of corpses. Loyalties were bought with silver and sealed with blood. Those who questioned him vanished into the dungeons beneath the palace, their names struck from the records. He placed the crown upon his own head in a ceremony thick with tension, the gazes of the old noble houses like daggers at his back. He was their king now, but he knew he was not their ruler. He was their keeper, and his reign began as it would end. Surrounded by enemies, real and imagined, with the metallic scent of betrayal already lingering in the air. To solidify his precarious rule, King Alaric required a queen not of his world but above it. He found her in Seraphina, a princess from a distant, sun-drenched kingdom, traded in a pact for peace and legitimacy. Her arrival was a spectacle of impossible grace. She moved through the grim, stone fortress of Ethelgard like a phantom of light, her presence a stark contrast to the court's brooding shadows. Her hair was spun gold, her eyes the color of a twilight sea, and her wisdom was a quiet, formidable force. The common folk adored her instantly. She was the gentle hand to the king's iron fist, a symbol of the prosperity he had promised. But Alaric saw her not as a partner, but as his most prized possession, another testament to his power. He showered her with jewels and silks, yet caged her in protocol and suspicion. He coveted her people's love for her, seeing it as a light that cast his own shadow into sharper relief. Queen Seraphina smiled in the courts and waved from the balconies, but in the solitude of her chambers, she felt the cold reality of her life. She was the kingdom's beautiful, gilded prisoner, her heart a frozen bird in a cage of gold and stone. A year after the queen's arrival, the kingdom's bells rang with a joy that seemed, for a moment, to banish the encroaching shadows. Princess Lyra was born. She was called the Winter Rose, a perfect, fragile bloom in a kingdom of ice and iron. She had her mother's ethereal beauty and a spark of her father's indomitable fire in her eyes. For a brief, shining period, her birth was a balm on the kingdom's festering wounds. King Alaric held his daughter aloft from the palace balcony, presenting her to the roaring crowds as the living embodiment of his legacy, the future of the dynasty he was building with his own two hands. The queen, watching from his side, felt a surge of hope so fierce it was painful. She believed Lyra could be the bridge between the king's ambition and the kingdom's soul, a reason for him to temper his cruelty with love. But hope is a fragile thing in a place like Ethelgard. As the princess grew, Alaric's pride curdled into something possessive and cold. He saw her not as a child to be nurtured, but as a strategic asset, a pure-blooded tool to be polished, and one day used to forge an even greater, more terrible power for himself. Her innocence was just another resource to be exploited in his unending war for control. The gilded halls of Ethelgard Palace were not a home, they were a hunting ground. Every tapestry concealed a listener, every whispered compliment carried a barb, and every shadow seemed to hold its breath. King Alaric, who had risen by exploiting the paranoia of others, now found himself consumed by it. He trusted no one. His council was filled with sycophants he had elevated, men whose loyalty was as thin as spun glass, their smiles hiding daggers of envy. The queen saw the signs first. A loyal chambermaid, known for her honesty, was dismissed on false charges of theft. A royal food taster fell deathly ill from a dish meant for the queen. A missive from her brother, a simple letter of familial affection, was delivered with its seal broken. She tried to warn the king, to show him the vipers he was nurturing in his own nest, but he had grown deaf to her voice. He saw her warnings as attempts to meddle, to undermine his authority with her foreign sensibilities. The shadows were lengthening, creeping from the corners of the court and beginning to coil around the throne itself. The palace was no longer just a place of intrigue, it was becoming a tomb, waiting for its occupants. King Alaric's hunger was a bottomless abyss. Having secured his kingdom, he now craved an empire. The promises of peace and prosperity he had made to his people were forgotten, replaced by the drumbeat of war. He bled the treasury dry to fund relentless campaigns against his neighbors, raising colossal armies that marched under his black banner. He saw Ethelgard not as a home to be cherished, but as a forge for his legacy, and its people were merely the fuel for its fires. To fund his conquests, he levied taxes so crushing that farms fell fallow and villages starved. He commissioned towering, monstrous statues of himself to be erected in every town square, monuments to a king who demanded worship, not love. His ambition became a fever, burning away his reason. He saw plots in every corner, traitors in every loyal servant. The queen's gentle pleas for restraint were met with furious accusations. The princess's laughter, once a source of joy, became an irritating distraction from his maps and war councils. He was no longer a king ruling a kingdom. He was a conqueror presiding over a glorified barracks, and every soul within it, including his own family, was now subject to the tyranny of his insatiable ego. Queen Seraphina was drowning in silence. The vibrant, intelligent woman who had arrived in Ethelgard was fading, becoming a pale specter haunting the castle's lonely corridors. Her days were a tapestry of quiet desperation. She watched from her high window as the kingdom groaned under the weight of her husband's ambition. She saw the gaunt faces of the common folk, the growing resentment in the eyes of the nobles, and the soul-crushing fear that had seeped into the very marrow of the court. She wrote letters to the king, long, carefully worded pleas filled with her sharp political insight, begging him to see the abyss he was leading them all towards. But he would leave them unread, a stack of elegant parchment gathering dust on his table, symbols of a voice he refused to hear. Her life became a secret war. She used her own dwindling funds to smuggle grain into the city, arranged for medicines to be distributed in secret, and tried to protect the innocent from the king's ever-deepening paranoia. Her every move was a risk, a dance on the razor's edge of treason. Her tears fell only in the moonlit solitude of the royal gardens, watering roses that seemed to wilt from her sorrow, each petal a silent testament to the queen who was loved by all but the one man who held her life in his hands. Princess Lyra grew up in a world of beautiful lies. Her chambers were filled with silks, her days with tutors who taught her of faraway lands and ancient poetry, but she was never taught the truth of her own kingdom. She was a bird in a magnificent cage, shielded from the stench of poverty and the whispers of rebellion that echoed beyond the palace walls. Yet, innocence is not blindness. She felt the chill that had settled between her parents, a frozen sea of unspoken words. She saw the fear in her mother's eyes and the frightening emptiness in her father's. The courtiers who once smiled at her now offered strained bows, their eyes darting away as if she were a ghost. Her destiny, she was told, was to be a great queen, but the path laid out for her was not one of her own choosing. King Alaric, in a move to secure his blood-soaked northern border, had betrothed her to the monstrous son of a warlord, a boy known for his cruelty and barbarism. Princess Lyra, whose heart was gentle and who dreamt of a love whispered about in poems, was being sold like chattel. Her fragile future was just another brick in the wall of her father's empire, and the crushing weight of her destiny was beginning to suffocate her. Every rotting kingdom has a secret that, once unearthed, acts as the catalyst for its final, spectacular collapse. In Ethelgard, that secret was hidden in a delicate, perfumed letter. Desperate to save her daughter from a monstrous marriage and her kingdom from a tyrant, Queen Seraphina had committed the ultimate act of treason. She had been secretly corresponding with the exiled duke of a neighboring land, a man her husband had deposed, a man of honor she believed could rally the oppressed lords against Alaric's madness. She was not planning a coup for her own power, but an intervention, a desperate gambit to save Ethelgard from the king himself. But the king's spymaster, a man whose loyalty was only to the darkest impulses of his master, intercepted the final letter. He twisted its meaning, painting the queen's plea for aid as an illicit love affair and a plot to place a foreign pretender on the throne. He presented the letter to Alaric not as evidence, but as a lighted torch. The king, his mind already a tinderbox of paranoia and jealousy, saw only the ultimate betrayal. The woman he possessed, the mother of his heir, had dared to defy him. In that moment, the last shred of his sanity burned away, leaving only a cold, murderous rage. The king's rage was the spark, but the kingdom was already a powder keg. Years of starvation, brutal taxation, and endless war had ground the people's loyalty to dust. The news of the queen's treason, proclaimed by royal criers, was not met with outrage but with disbelief and then fury. They loved their queen, the only source of compassion in their wretched lives. Her arrest was the final injustice, the breaking point. The rebellion started not as a plan but as a roar, a collective, guttural cry of a people with nothing left to lose. It began in the city's poorest quarters, with peasants arming themselves with farming tools and butchers' knives. Soon, disgruntled knights and alienated noble houses who had long chafed under Alaric's tyranny joined the fray. The city became a vision of hell. Barricades of burning carts choked the streets. The king's statues were torn down, their stone heads smashed to pieces. The royal guard, their morale shattered by the queen's fate, fought with half-hearted conviction before breaking and joining the mob. The great, impenetrable gates of the palace were breached, and the tide of vengeful humanity poured into the gilded halls, their torches casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. Queen Seraphina was not granted the dignity of a trial. Dragged from her chambers, she was locked in the highest cell of the Onyx Tower, the sky her only companion. King Alaric, his face a mask of incandescent fury, confronted her there alone. He did not want justice. He wanted to break her. He showed her the intercepted letter, his voice a venomous hiss as he accused her of adultery and treason. Her calm, tearful denials only fueled his madness. He saw her strength as defiance, her pleas for their daughter as manipulation. His judgment was swift and barbaric. He had her brought to the central courtyard, where the rebellion was already raging outside the walls. He wanted her death to be a message. As the terrified courtiers and a few captured rebels were forced to watch, she was executed. Her final moments were not spent pleading for her own life, but looking up towards the palace window where she knew her daughter was watching. Her last words were not a curse upon the king, but a whispered prayer for Lyra, a name carried away on the wind. Her death was the severing of the kingdom's last thread of hope, an act so monstrous it turned a rebellion into a holy war of vengeance. With the queen's blood still staining the courtyard stones, the palace's final defenses crumbled. The mob, now an unstoppable force of nature, swarmed the inner sanctum. King Alaric was found not in a heroic last stand but cowering behind his massive throne, clutching his sword like a frightened child. He was dragged out, kicking and screaming, his royal finery torn from his body. The people did not grant him a quick death. That would have been a mercy he did not deserve. They chained him and hauled him to the great marble balcony, the very spot where he had once presented his infant daughter to a cheering crowd. They forced his eyes open, making him watch the culmination of his life's work. He watched his great city, the heart of his empire, being devoured by a sea of fire. He watched the monuments to his glory crumble into dust. He heard the screams of the dying, the roar of the inferno, and the triumphant cries of those who had overthrown him. He was left there, chained to the balcony railing as the flames climbed the palace walls, a king forced to witness his own legacy being erased by the very fires his tyranny had lit. His final screams were of despair, a terrible, lonely sound, before the fire consumed him completely. In the blood and chaos of the palace's fall, Princess Lyra simply vanished. Her fate became a ghost story, a fractured legend told in hushed tones by the survivors. Some say the mob, blinded by rage and seeing only her father's face in hers, tore her from her chambers and gave her a swift, brutal end in the fiery courtyard. A mercifully quick death compared to her parents. A more sorrowful tale insists a single loyal guard managed to smuggle her out through a secret passage, her face veiled in rags. They say she fled into the unforgiving winter forests, her fragile body eventually succumbing to grief and cold, and that she was buried in an unmarked grave beneath a snow-laden pine. But the most chilling whisper, the one that lingers longest in the dark, is that the new lords of the rebellion, fearing she could become a symbol for royalist factions, did not kill her. Instead, they locked her away deep within the palace dungeons, in a forgotten cell behind a bricked-up wall. There, she lived out her days in absolute darkness and silence, her name erased, her existence a secret, until she became nothing more than a memory of a memory, the lost princess of a dead kingdom, forgotten by the very history she was born to lead. When the fires finally died down, Ethelgard was a corpse. The city was a blackened skeleton, its grand boulevards choked with rubble and the unburied dead. The air, thick with the stench of death and ash, hung heavy over the ruins for months. The rebellion had won, but their victory was hollow, their prize a kingdom of cinders. The new regime, forged in the crucible of violence and vengeance, soon proved to be as cruel and self-serving as the one it had replaced. The cycle of power simply began anew, built upon the same foundations of fear and bloodshed. The great palace, once the heart of an empire, became a monument to ruin. Its scorched walls stood silhouetted against the gray sky, a permanent scar on the landscape. Treasure hunters and scavengers picked through its remains, but found nothing of value left. The throne room, now open to the elements, became a place of superstition, a haunted ground where the wind was said to carry the agonized whispers of a dead king, a murdered queen, and a lost princess. The golden age Alaric had promised had ended in a dark age of desolation, leaving behind only silence and a pervasive, unending sorrow. A king's ambition can build an empire, or it can dig a grave large enough for his entire kingdom. King Alaric's legacy was not written in stone monuments, but in the ash that nourished the weeds in his ruined courtyard. He reached for immortality and grasped only oblivion. The queen, a beacon of light, was extinguished by the very darkness she sought to illuminate, her wisdom a tragic footnote in a history written by madmen. And the princess, the winter rose, was a promise that never had the chance to bloom, a final innocent victim sacrificed on the altar of power. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that a crown is not merely a symbol of authority, but a heavy burden often paid for in blood, both the blood of enemies and the blood of kin. The throne of Ethelgard did not bring glory, it brought a curse. It was a chair that promised the world but delivered only a fiery end, proving that a kingdom built on the suffering of its people is nothing but a funeral pyre waiting for a spark. Their names are gone, but their tragedy echoes, a permanent stain on the pages of history. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.